The notification came at 2:47 in the morning. You didn't reach for your phone because you were awake. You reached for it because you had never fallen asleep. The room was dark. The house was quiet in that particular way that feels like pressure rather than rest. Not the quiet of safety, but the quiet of a held breath. And you lay there, scrolling through something, anything, looking for the sensation of calm that kept refusing to arrive. Maybe you opened a breathing app. Maybe you played rain sounds looping on a speaker you bought specifically for this problem. Maybe you read something soft and measured that told you to inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4. And for a moment, a genuine moment, it almost worked. Your shoulders dropped half an inch. Your jaw unclenched. Your eyes grew heavy at the edges. And then your mind handed you the thing it had been holding all day. The worry you didn't finish. The conversation that went sideways and has been replaying ever since. The future that will not stop looking uncertain no matter how many times you try to arrange it into something you can live with. The diagnosis that is pending. The relationship that is fraying at a seam you don't know how to reach. The decision you cannot make because none of the options feel safe. The breathing exercise ended. The rain sounds looped back to the beginning. And the peace, that elusive luminous thing you had been reaching for all night, was gone before you were fully sure it had arrived. This is what I want to talk to you about today. Not the absence of peace as evidence of spiritual failure. Not as a sign that your faith is insufficient or your prayer life is undisciplined or that God is deliberately withholding something as a lesson in patience. I want to talk about the specific, particular way that modern life has taught us to treat peace like a product, something to be downloaded, optimized, practiced into existence, and what the Bible actually says about where peace comes from, and why it goes deeper and reaches further, and holds longer than anything a screen or an app or a guided session has ever been able to give you. Stay with me until the end of this. We're going to pray through this together. And I believe that something in you is going to settle before we are done. There is a kind of peace the world offers that is always conditional. It requires the circumstances to cooperate first. It needs the diagnosis to come back clean, the relationship to stabilize, the finances to recover, the situation to resolve itself into something manageable before it will agree to show up. The world's peace is a weather condition. It arrives when everything else aligns, and it leaves the moment the pressure system shifts. You have probably noticed, if you have been paying attention across the arc of your own life, that the weather does not respond to requests. That is why the wellness industry is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. That is why sleep content, breathing apps, guided meditation platforms, and ambient sound generators have become utilities rather than luxuries. That is why people who genuinely love God, people with real faith, people who have walked with Him through genuinely difficult things and witnessed Him move, still reach for their phones at 2:47 in the morning instead of finding rest. Not because they have failed spiritually. Not because their faith is counterfeit. But because they have been searching in places that were never architecturally designed to hold what they are actually hungry for. A meditation app can slow your nervous system. It cannot speak peace to your soul. Those are different things. And the confusion between them, the tendency to treat the first as a substitute for the second, is one of the quiet heartbreaks of the modern Christian life. And I want to tell you something about that hunger. Something I think you need to hear before this is over. Because the hunger itself is not the problem. The hunger is the point. It is pointing somewhere. In John 14, Jesus is speaking to His disciples on the night before everything falls apart. They are gathered in an upper room. They have just shared a meal. And the atmosphere has shifted in a way that everyone in the room can feel but no one can fully name. The disciples are unsettled in that specific way you get unsettled when dread arrives before the understanding does, when something in your chest knows something is coming before your mind has assembled the evidence. Jesus has been saying things that don't land right. He has talked about going somewhere they cannot follow. He has spoken about betrayal. He has washed their feet with a tenderness that felt, in the moment, like a kind of goodbye. Thomas does not understand where Jesus is going. Philip asks to be shown the Father. The questions are confused and frightened and specific, and Jesus meets every one of them. And then, into that particular atmosphere of anticipatory grief, He says this, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." Sit with that for a moment. He says those words on the night before the arrest. On the night before the trial. On the night before a crucifixion that will scatter every person in that room and leave them in hiding for their lives. He is not speaking peace into a room where things are about to get easier. He is speaking peace into a room that is hours away from a catastrophe none of them will survive unchanged. That is not the peace of favorable conditions. That is something categorically different. It is peace as a gift given in advance. Peace as a presence that goes with you into the worst night. Peace that does not require the storm to stop before it agrees to arrive. If this is touching something you have been carrying quietly and alone, let someone know by leaving a like on this video. It takes 1 second and it helps this devotional find the people who need it most. The Apostle Paul understood this distinction in a way that should be almost disorienting if you read it carefully and honestly. He writes the letter to the Philippians from prison. Not a metaphor for a difficult season. An actual Roman prison cell. He is awaiting a verdict that could mean his execution. He has been there long enough that his situation has become a kind of established fact rather than a crisis. And from inside that cell, he writes one of the most joyful letters in the New Testament. He tells the Philippians in chapter 4, "Do not be anxious about anything." And the natural human response to that instruction, when you are lying awake at 2:47 in the morning, is something between a laugh and a wince. Do not be anxious about anything. Sure. Thank you, Paul. And then he gives them something practical to do with the anxiety. Bring it to God. Prayer, petition, thanksgiving. Not in that order as a formula, but as a posture, as a way of approaching God with the full, unfiltered contents of what you are carrying, and doing so with gratitude for the access itself. And then he says something that stops you entirely if you let it. He says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Guard. Like a soldier posted at a gate. Not a sensation you generate. Not a state you achieve through sufficient practice. A guardian. An active, present protection that stands between you and the spiral. That is available to people who do one thing. Bring everything to God honestly and trust that He can hold it. The peace Paul is describing does not require the circumstances to resolve first. It arrived in a prison cell. It can arrive in a dark bedroom at 2:47 in the morning. It can arrive in the waiting room before the doctor speaks. It can arrive in the silence after someone walks out. It transcends understanding because it is not produced by understanding. It is not the peace of having figured it out. It is the peace of being held by someone who has. There is something deeply important here that I do not want you to miss. The anxiety you carry is not evidence that your faith is broken. The inability to feel peace through sheer willpower is not a spiritual deficiency. Paul does not say, "Calm yourself down." He says, "Bring it to God." There is a radical difference between those two instructions. One puts the entire weight of peace production on you. The other places it where it actually belongs. Let me offer you something practical here, because faith without form has a way of staying beautiful in theory and unavailable in the actual 2:47 moment. Before you reach for the phone tonight, before the app, before the rain sounds, before the scroll that goes nowhere, try reaching in a different direction first. Not a polished prayer. Not the version of yourself that has composed the request into acceptable spiritual language. The unedited version. Whatever it actually sounds like right now. I am scared and I cannot name exactly why. This situation has not moved and I am exhausted from waiting. I feel nothing when I try to pray and I need you to be real to me tonight. This is not a failure of faith. This is precisely what the Psalms look like. David, the man God himself described as a man after his own heart, wrote things like, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart?" That is in Psalm 13. That is not a polished prayer. That is someone reaching into what felt like genuine darkness and trusting, with the specific fragile trust of someone who is not certain, that there is a hand there to find. God did not reject that prayer. He preserved it. He put it in His book. He wanted you to know that this is what reaching toward Him is allowed to look like. The second practical thing is quieter than it sounds. Begin to notice the peace that is already present in the small, overlooked architecture of your day. This is what Paul means when he tells the Philippians to think about things that are true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, things of excellence, things worthy of praise. He is not asking them to perform optimism. He is not suggesting that the difficulty is less real than it feels. He is describing a practice of attention, a deliberate choice to let your mind also hold what is good, because gratitude and anxiety cannot fully occupy the same space at the same time. The coffee that was still warm when you got to it this morning, the person who stayed when they could have left, the body that carried you through a day that asked a great deal of it, the morning that came again when some part of you was not entirely sure it would. Peace is not only something you seek at a distance. It is also something you practice receiving in the small increments and ordinary forms in which it arrives every single day, forms so quiet and consistent that they are easy to look past. And a third thing, and this one is more important than it might appear at first, let someone know what you are actually carrying. Not everyone. Not in every context. But one person who is safe, one person who will not minimize or fix or redirect, needs to know the real version. Because the isolation that insomnia builds around you at 2:47 in the morning is not a neutral condition. It feeds the anxiety it appears to protect you from. It convinces you that the weight is uniquely yours, that no one would understand, that being known in this particular struggle would change something essential about how you are seen. That is a lie that thrives in the dark. Galatians 6 says to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. That is not a metaphor for emotional support in general. It is a literal description of what community is for. The weight was not designed to be carried by one person alone. God works through human presence in ways that breathe and listen and sit with you in the room in a manner that no digital experience has ever been able to replicate. You were not made to carry this quietly. You were made to be known. There is something else I want to say here because I think it matters enormously and does not get said often enough. The fact that you are searching for peace, that you downloaded the app, that you found this devotional, that some part of you keeps reaching for something beyond the noise, is not a symptom of weakness. It is evidence of something alive in you. It is the spiritual equivalent of hunger. And hunger, when it is honest, leads you somewhere. The question is only whether you follow it to the right source. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." He did not say, "Blessed are the ones who already feel satisfied." He said, "Blessed are the hungry ones, the ones still searching. The ones who have not settled for the conditional peace of favorable circumstances and know there is something more real available somewhere. That is you. Right now. In this. And the hunger itself is not the problem. The hunger is the invitation. Share this with someone in your life who needs permission today to stop performing strength. I want to tell you about a man named Elijah. And I want to tell you about the version of him that nobody frames and puts on the wall. You know the other version, the one who stood on Mount Carmel and called down fire from heaven. The one who prayed against the prophets of Baal in one of the most dramatic confrontations in the entire Old Testament. The sacrifice soaked in water, the prayer spoken with complete confidence, and then the fire of the Lord falling and consuming everything. The burnt offering, the wood, the stones, the soil, even the water in the trench. The people fell on their faces. They declared that the Lord, He is God. The drought that had lasted 3.5 years broke with the sound of a heavy rain. It was, by any measure, one of the most breathtaking demonstrations of divine power in Scripture. And then Elijah ran. Queen Jezebel received word of what had happened. She sent him a message, "By this time tomorrow your life will be like the lives of those you killed." And something in Elijah, who had just watched fire fall from heaven, collapsed completely. He ran for his life. He traveled a full day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a juniper tree and he prayed that he might die. He said, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm not better than my ancestors." Think about what just happened. This is not a man who has drifted from faith. This is not a man in some prolonged spiritual drought. This is a man who witnessed fire fall from heaven yesterday and is now asking God to let him die. This is the same man. In the same life. 24 hours apart. The victory did not deliver the peace he had been hoping it would. The miracle did not inoculate him against the exhaustion and fear that followed. He had expended everything he had in that confrontation, and what remained on the other side was not triumph. It was depletion. A specific, disorienting kind of depletion that arrives after enormous expenditure of self. The kind where the emotional body has nothing left to meet the next threat, no matter how small the threat is relative to the one that just passed. Elijah fell asleep under that tree. And here is what God did. He did not rebuke him. He did not remind him of the fire and suggest that his fear was theologically inconsistent with what he had just witnessed. He did not deliver a lesson about trusting more or doubting less. He sent an angel who touched him and said very simply, "Get up and eat." There was bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. Elijah ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel came back a second time and touched him again and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." The journey is too much for you. God said that. Not as a criticism. As a compassion. As a recognition of the real condition of a real person who was genuinely spent. He fed him. He let him sleep. He took care of the body that was carrying the depleted soul. And then, only then, after the rest, after the food, after the care, God met Elijah at the entrance of a cave on Mount Horeb and spoke to him. There was a great wind that tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks. God was not in the wind. There was an earthquake. God was not in the earthquake. There was fire. God was not in the fire. And after the fire there was a still, small voice. A gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and stood at the entrance of the cave. and God spoke to him there. 1 Kings 19. One of the most tender passages in the entire Bible, because it tells us something specific and essential about how God moves in the lives of people who have nothing left. He does not always speak in the dramatic. He does not require the spectacular to be his medium. Sometimes, often actually, he speaks in the whisper that arrives after you have rested, after you have been fed, after someone has touched your shoulder and said, "You are not done. The journey continues. But first let me take care of you." If you are lying awake tonight, that story is not just an account of something that happened to someone else in a wilderness 3,000 years ago. That story is for you. The depleted version of you. The version who has given enormous amounts of yourself to something and received what felt like silence or threat in return. The version who looked at the fire you thought would change everything and discovered that the fear came back anyway. God met Elijah exactly there, in the exhaustion, in the wilderness, under a tree, asking to die. He will meet you exactly where you are too. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. These conversations are made for the people who need them, and there is more ahead. There is a passage in Isaiah 40 that was written to people who understood exile in a way that went all the way down. These were not people going through a difficult season who needed encouragement to hold on. These were people who had lost everything that gave their faith its shape. The temple was gone. Jerusalem was gone. The land was gone. The entire physical and institutional structure around which their understanding of God had been organized had been dismantled by a foreign empire and carried away. They were not just homesick. They were theologically disoriented. The things they had believed about how God worked, the promises, the covenant, the presence attached to a specific place, had seemingly stopped functioning as advertised. And into that specific, devastating condition, the prophet speaks. He does not speak with false cheer. He does not minimize the loss. He begins by saying that the nations are like a drop in a bucket to God, that the earth's inhabitants are like grasshoppers, that God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. He is reorienting their sense of scale, not to make their suffering feel small, but to make the God who is with them feel immense. And then he says this: He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary. Even young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Notice what that progression actually does. It starts at the top, eagles, soaring, breathtaking. And then it moves to running. And then it arrives at something quieter and more demanding than either of those. Walking. Not flying. Not running. Walking. Not fainting. Just continuing. Just still being in motion when the motion itself feels like the whole of what is left. Sometimes the miracle is the soaring. Sometimes, in the truest and most sustaining sense, the miracle is that you are still walking. That you are still here. That you have not fainted. That you are still willing to bring the depleted, complicated, uncertain version of yourself to God one more time and say, "I need you. I cannot produce this peace from within myself. I cannot breathe or meditate or optimize my way to a settled soul. But you said your peace was different from what the world gives. You said it transcended understanding. You said it would guard my heart. I'm asking you to do that now. In this room. At this hour. While it is still dark. Let's pray together. God, we come to you right now, tonight or this morning or whatever unnamed hour it actually is, exactly as we are. We are not composed. We have not arranged this into the right words or the right posture. We come with the exact weight we have been carrying through the day and into the dark, the anxiety that hasn't resolved, the fear that hasn't responded to everything we have thrown at it, the weariness that sleep alone cannot fix. We lay all of it down now. Not because we are finished feeling it, not because it has stopped being real, but because you said to bring it to you. All of it without the editing. And so we bring all of it. We ask for your peace. Not the peace that arrives when the circumstances cooperate. Not the peace that waits for the resolution before it agrees to show up. We ask for the peace that Paul described from a prison cell, the peace that transcends understanding, the peace that stands guard at the door of our hearts and our minds. We cannot explain the mechanics of that. We do not need to. We just need it. And you said it was available. And we are here. Where we are exhausted in ways that sleep has not touched, be our strength. Where we are frightened by things we cannot fully articulate, be the still small voice that speaks after the wind and the earthquake and the fire, in the quiet we did not think we would find. Where we have been running on the momentum of performing fine for so long that we have forgotten what it felt like not to, remind us that you see the real version. That you met Elijah under a tree asking to die and your response was bread and water and rest. That is who you are. Help us receive care today. Help us sleep when sleep comes. Help us eat. Help us reach toward the one or two people who are safe enough to know what we are actually carrying. And help us reach toward you first, before the phone, before the app, before the scroll that takes us nowhere we actually need to go. We trust that you are good even when the goodness is not yet visible to us. We trust that your presence is real even when it registers as silence. We trust that the peace you offer goes deeper than any breathing count, any ambient sound, any carefully engineered digital experience was ever designed to reach. We receive it now, quietly, by faith, in whatever form it arrives. Amen. You are going to close this in a moment and the world outside is going to still be moving. The thing you are anxious about is still going to be there. I'm not going to tell you otherwise because you deserve honesty more than you need comfort right now. But here is what I want to leave with you, as one image you can carry through whatever this day asks of you. There is a peace that is already moving in your direction. It is not waiting on the other side of the circumstances getting better. It is not held behind a spiritual achievement level or a consistency streak or a version of yourself that has finished processing the hard thing. It was spoken into a room full of frightened people the night before a crucifixion, and it has been in motion toward you ever since. It crossed exile. It crossed a prison cell. It found a man sitting under a tree in the wilderness asking to die and arrived there as bread and water and a voice that said, "The journey is not over, but first, rest." That peace knows your name. It knows the specific weight you are carrying and the specific hour you are carrying it in. And it is not conditional on you earning the right to receive it. You do not have to manufacture what you were always meant to receive. You only have to stop reaching past it for something smaller. There will be another night like the one you had. There will be another 247, another moment when the room is dark and the mind is loud and the calm you need feels just out of reach. And when that night comes, I hope you remember this. The peace that Jesus described is not a destination you arrive at after sufficient spiritual effort. It is a person. It is His presence. And His presence does not require the circumstances to be favorable before it agrees to enter the room. It came into an upper room on the night before a crucifixion. It came to a prison cell in Rome. It came to a man under a tree in the wilderness asking to die. It has never once required the conditions to be right before it showed up. That is the peace that goes deeper than any meditation app. Not because the apps are bad, they are tools and tools have their place. But because no tool was ever designed to do what only a presence can do. No algorithm has ever been engineered to sit with you in the specific weight of your specific life and say, "I know. I see you. I am here. The journey is too much for you alone. But you are not alone. And I am not finished with you yet. Go gently today. That is enough. And come back whenever you need to. This is what we are here for."